It was a chilly Friday night in late October 2014 when Claire Hensley left her part-time job at a small coffee shop just north of downtown Chicago. The shop, known for its late hours and cheap lattes, was usually bustling on weekends, but that night the streets outside felt quieter than usual. The wind swept off Lake Michigan, carrying a cold bite that made her pull her jacket tighter as she walked toward the bus stop. Claire was 24 years old, bright-eyed, and full of the restless energy that young adulthood often brings. She was studying journalism at a local community college, balancing classes with her shifts at the cafe, and dreaming of one day writing hard-hitting investigative pieces for a major paper. Friends described her as curious, sharp-witted, and someone who asked too many questions for her own good. The bus never came. Tired and impatient, Claire decided to take a shortcut through the neighborhood streets instead of waiting. She pulled her phone from her bag and called her roommate, Megan, to say she'd be home soon. Megan later recalled that Claire sounded a little uneasy, like she was checking her surroundings as she walked. "I'll be back in 20, maybe 30 minutes, Claire had said. Those were the last words Megan ever heard from her. Witnesses later told police they saw Claire walking briskly along a dimly lit stretch of Halsted Street. Some said she seemed to be glancing over her shoulder, as if she felt someone was following her. Others reported seeing a dark sedan idling near the curb, headlights dimmed, its engine rumbling quietly. Nobody thought much of it at the time. In a city like Chicago, cars came and went, and strangers passed each other every night. By the time Megan grew worried enough to call Claire again, the phone went straight to voicemail. She tried texting, no reply. Hours passed, and by morning Claire had still not returned. That was when Megan called the police. The case was initially treated like a routine missing persons report. Adults went missing all the time, officers said. Maybe Claire had stayed with a friend. Maybe she'd gone out for the night. Maybe she needed space. But Megan insisted this wasn't like her. Claire was dependable, and she had early classes the next day that she would never skip. Reluctantly, detectives began a preliminary check. Security cameras along Halsted Street caught fragments of Claire's walk. In grainy black and white footage, she could be seen moving quickly, clutching her bag. A minute later, headlights flashed at the corner of the screen, the same dark sedan witnesses had mentioned. The vehicle trailed her for several blocks before disappearing from view. And then Claire was gone. No further sightings, no digital footprint, no trace. It was as if she had been swallowed by the city itself. For her family, the nightmare had just begun. Her mother, Susan, drove in from the suburbs, plastering the streets with missing posters that showed Claire's smiling face. Her father, John, gave tearful interviews pleading for her safe return. The case caught local media attention, with headlines reading, "Young woman vanishes after leaving work." But behind the cameras and press conferences, detectives were already sensing that something about Claire's disappearance was different. This wasn't a simple case of a runaway, nor the kind of vanishing tied to random violence on the streets. There were signs, small but unmistakable, that she may have been deliberately targeted. The sedan was never identified. License plate records in the area came back inconclusive. No driver stepped forward. No one claimed to have seen Claire get inside. But the lingering question haunted investigators. Who was behind the wheel, and why were they following her? For weeks, leads came and went. Anonymous tips poured in, sightings in bus stations, vague claims from strangers who swore they'd seen her in other cities. Each lead was chased. Each one collapsed. The family grew more desperate. Detectives began digging into Claire's personal life, searching for any clue that might explain her disappearance. What they found was unsettling. In the weeks before she vanished, Claire had been working on a school project about crime in Chicago. Her focus wasn't on the usual gang violence or drug arrests, but on something far darker. Whispers of trafficking operations running quietly through the city's underbelly. According to her professors, Claire had become unusually fixated on this topic. She spent long hours in the library, filed requests for public records, and even spoke to sources in rough neighborhoods where outsiders rarely ventured. One professor recalled warning her, "Be careful. You're asking questions that people don't want answered." Was her curiosity the reason she disappeared, or was it only a coincidence? For her family, the answer didn't matter. They wanted her home. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Claire's case slipped from the front pages. Other stories took its place. Other tragedies filled the news cycle. For most people, Claire became just another face on a missing poster. But for those who loved her, and for Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator, the mystery had only deepened. And this was only the beginning. Detective Daniel Ramirez had been with the Chicago Police Department for nearly 2 decades when he was assigned to Claire Hensley's case. He had seen plenty of missing person reports come and go, most of them resolved within a few days. A fight with a boyfriend, a night of heavy drinking, a runaway who turned up safe at a relative's home. But this one felt different. Ramirez had reviewed the grainy security footage of Claire's last known steps at least a dozen times. The young woman was clearly on edge, her eyes darting toward the shadows, her shoulders hunched. And then there was the car. That dark sedan, easing down the street behind her, lights low, like a predator stalking its prey. What unsettled Ramirez most was not the car itself, but the precision of its movements. Whoever was driving wasn't just passing by. They were shadowing her. 2 weeks after Claire's disappearance, Ramirez got a call from a neighboring precinct. A woman named Jessica Lowe, aged 28, had gone missing under strikingly similar circumstances. She, too, had been walking home late at night after work. She, too, had been last seen in shaky surveillance footage, followed by what appeared to be a dark sedan. The city didn't take notice. Chicago was a place where people vanished every day, sometimes without explanation, often without closure. But Ramirez began keeping a private file. He clipped newspaper reports, gathered missing person flyers, and logged details that nobody else seemed interested in connecting. By the end of that month, there were 3 names in his folder: Claire Hensley, Jessica Lowe, and now Emily Sanchez, a 31-year-old nurse who disappeared after finishing a night shift. The similarities were unnerving. Each was a young woman, walking alone at night, last seen in or near the same stretch of the city. Each was followed by a dark car that never appeared again in the footage after the victim vanished. And none of the 3 had any history of running away, criminal ties, or reasons to disappear willingly. When Ramirez brought his theory to his captain, he was met with silence. "We don't have the manpower to chase ghosts," the captain said finally. "These cases aren't officially linked. Without bodies, without evidence, there's no serial anything. Just 3 separate tragedies." But Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that the cases were bound by something unseen. One night, long after most detectives had gone home, he sat alone in the squad room, flipping through the thin files. The faces of the missing women stared back at him from the reports. Smiling in family photos, laughing at parties, frozen in happier times. The city was swallowing them whole, and no one seemed to notice. He began mapping their last known movements on a large city map. Red pins marked each disappearance site. When he stepped back, a pattern seemed to emerge. All 3 had vanished within a 5-mile radius, near industrial zones that bordered the outskirts of Chicago, areas where few people lingered at night, where old warehouses stood abandoned and streetlights flickered on empty corners. As Ramirez studied the map, a strange realization settled over him. Whoever was behind this knew the city well. They were hunting in the gaps, those forgotten stretches between busy neighborhoods and empty lots. Places the police rarely patrolled, places where screams would go unheard. Still, Ramirez had no evidence strong enough to pursue. All he had were suspicions, a handful of grainy video stills, and the gnawing certainty that something far darker was unfolding. Then came the 4th disappearance. Her name was Hannah Price, a 26-year-old graduate student. She vanished on her way home from the university library. By now, Ramirez knew what to expect. A late-night walk, a quiet street, and the shadow of a car that seemed to materialize from nowhere. This time, however, there was one crucial difference. A witness. A man named Robert Nichols had been walking his dog when he noticed Hannah being trailed by the same kind of sedan others had described. He remembered it clearly because the car slowed down when she turned the corner, almost as if waiting for her to realize she was being followed. Robert couldn't see the driver's face, but he recalled the car's taillights glowing faintly red as it disappeared down the block. For Ramirez, this was confirmation. Someone was orchestrating these disappearances, and they were doing it with chilling precision. But what haunted him most was the growing silence that followed each case. Families cried out for answers. Friends organized vigils. But the city kept moving. News headlines shifted to other crises, and the public slowly forgot. Only Ramirez couldn't forget. He felt as if he were chasing a shadow that slipped further from his grasp with every step. And somewhere, in the dark streets of Chicago, a predator was hunting again. It was a bitter January morning when the call came in. A jogger, out before sunrise, had spotted something unusual along the banks of the Calumet River, just south of the city. At first he thought it was a bundle of old clothes tangled in the reeds. But as he drew closer, he realized the truth. It was a body. Detective Ramirez arrived at the scene with a familiar heaviness in his chest. The winter air stung his face as he crossed the muddy embankment where uniformed officers had cordoned off the area with yellow tape. The victim was female, partially submerged in icy water. Her hair was matted with mud and weeds. She wore a torn winter coat, the pockets inside out as if emptied in a hurry. There were no shoes on her feet. It took hours for the medical examiner to confirm what Ramirez already suspected. The body belonged to Jessica Lowe, the second woman who had gone missing 2 months earlier. Her face was swollen, her skin pale from weeks in the cold river. But her hands told another story. The fingernails were broken, jagged, filled with traces of blood that wasn't hers. She had fought. Nearby, investigators found tire tracks pressed into the damp earth near the water's edge. They were faint but distinct enough to suggest that a vehicle had backed up close to the riverbank. Whoever had dumped her body had done so quickly, efficiently. Jessica's discovery rattled the families of the other missing women. If she had been found like this, what did it mean for Claire, Emily, and Hannah? Hope was fading, replaced with the creeping horror that their daughters, sisters, and friends might never return alive. The press descended on the story once again. Headlines screamed about a possible predator lurking in the city. Reporters swarmed Ramirez outside the precinct, demanding to know if Chicago had a serial killer. Ramirez wanted to say yes. Every fiber of his instincts told him this was true. But without a suspect, without proof beyond his map of red pins, all he could do was offer a careful, measured response. "The investigation is ongoing," he told the cameras. "We are following all leads." But behind closed doors, the tension grew. His captain reminded him not to fuel panic. "One body doesn't make a serial killer," the captain said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We treat it as an isolated homicide until we know otherwise." Yet Ramirez knew better. The autopsy confirmed Jessica had died of strangulation. There were ligature marks around her neck, deep bruising consistent with someone who had been restrained. And there was something else, something more unsettling. Small traces of a chemical were found in her bloodstream, a sedative commonly used in hospitals. She had been drugged before she was killed. That detail gnawed at Ramirez. Whoever was responsible had access to more than just opportunity. They had knowledge. They had a plan. This wasn't random street violence. It was organized, methodical, deliberate. The discovery of Jessica's body also confirmed another grim reality. The missing women weren't just gone. They were victims of something far darker. Families began holding vigils outside police headquarters, demanding answers. Candlelight flickered against the cold glass windows, faces bowed in prayer. The city, for the first time, seemed to realize that the disappearances weren't isolated tragedies. They were chapters in a larger, more terrifying story. And as Ramirez stood at the riverbank that night, staring at the place where Jessica's life had ended, he knew this was only the beginning. Because predators don't stop after one victim. They keep hunting. And somewhere in Chicago, another young woman was already being watched. 2 weeks after Jessica Lowe's body was pulled from the Calumet River, another call jolted Detective Ramirez awake before dawn. This time it was a fisherman, casting nets along the Des Plaines River on the city's western edge. He had found something snagged against the rocks. When Ramirez arrived, the scene was all too familiar. Another woman, half hidden in the water, her clothing torn, her skin bloated from weeks of submersion. The current had carried her downstream, but investigators believed she had been dumped deliberately near an abandoned industrial dock. Dental records confirmed what Ramirez feared. It was Emily Sanchez, the nurse who had vanished after her night shift. Just like Jessica, Emily bore the marks of restraint. Her wrists showed deep bruises where she had been tied. The autopsy revealed the same sedative in her system, the same cause of death: strangulation. The pattern was no longer speculation. It was fact. Ramirez gathered his files and spread them across his desk. 4 women missing. 2 now confirmed dead. All drugged, restrained, strangled, and discarded in rivers on opposite sides of the city. The rivers. That was the detail that caught his attention. Jessica and Emily weren't buried or hidden in shallow graves. They were left in water, placed there deliberately. It was as if the killer wanted their bodies to vanish beneath the current, to be carried away, erased by the city's forgotten waterways. But rivers don't erase everything. They return what they're given. Still, the message was chilling. The killer wasn't afraid of discovery. If anything, it felt as though he was sending a warning. You won't stop me. You'll only find what I allow you to find. The press ran with the story, dubbing the unknown predator the River Strangler. Headlines screamed across Chicago's morning papers. 2 women found dead in city rivers. Police investigate serial killer theory. Reporters camped outside the precinct. Talk shows speculated endlessly. Families of the missing clung to each new update, their hope dwindling with every passing day. Ramirez, however, felt only frustration. Every lead he chased dissolved into nothing. Witnesses remembered shadows, not faces. Cameras caught cars, never license plates. Each clue led him deeper into a maze with no exit. Then came something that shook him further. As he studied the map of disappearances, Ramirez noticed that the dumping sites weren't random. They formed a rough arc across the city, north to south, east to west, as if someone was drawing invisible lines across Chicago's rivers. But why? Some investigators suggested it was ritualistic, that the killer was choosing symbolic sites. Others believed he was simply disposing of bodies where police presence was lightest. Ramirez wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't choosing victims or locations at random. There was a method in the madness. Meanwhile, the families demanded answers. Emily's mother collapsed outside the coroner's office when her daughter's remains were identified. Jessica's brother lashed out at reporters, shouting that the police had failed them. "How many more have to die," he yelled, "before they admit what's happening in this city?" The tension inside the precinct grew unbearable. Ramirez's captain wanted quick results, something to calm the public. But Ramirez knew there would be no easy answers. Because even as the city grieved the deaths of Jessica and Emily, Ramirez felt it in his gut. The killer wasn't finished. Not yet. Somewhere in Chicago, another life was already in his sights. The city was restless. With 2 bodies confirmed and 2 women still missing, the press had turned the story into a nightly spectacle. Talk shows debated whether Chicago had its own serial killer. Police hotlines were flooded with tips, most of them useless. People swore they saw the dark sedan in every neighborhood, trailing every young woman walking home after dusk. For Detective Ramirez, the chaos only made the silence around the real predator more deafening. Then, in the third week of February, a tip came in that made his pulse quicken. A security guard at a riverside hospital reported seeing a man loitering near the staff parking lot late at night. The guard remembered him because he seemed oddly calm, just standing there watching as nurses and orderlies left their shifts. When the guard approached, the man slipped away into a dark sedan parked under a broken light. The guard managed to jot down part of the license plate before the car pulled off. Ramirez ran the numbers, and what came back was unsettling. The vehicle was registered to a man named Thomas Keene, a 42-year-old maintenance worker employed at a hospital across town. Keene had no serious criminal record, but something about his file struck Ramirez. He had previously worked at 2 other hospitals over the last decade, each one near districts where women had gone missing, and according to his employment records, Keene often worked the graveyard shift. When Ramirez pulled Keene's photo, he studied it carefully. A narrow face, thinning hair, eyes that looked straight through the camera without expression. He could have been anyone, an ordinary man in a city of millions. But there was something about the blankness of his stare that unsettled Ramirez. With a small team, Ramirez began surveillance. They followed Keene after his shift, watched him drive his dark sedan down quiet streets, always alone, always cautious. He never broke traffic laws, never lingered long in any one place. But his routes often took him along the very river roads where Jessica and Emily had been found. Then came the moment that made Ramirez's breath catch. One night, from an unmarked car, Ramirez watched Keene pull over near an overgrown stretch of the Des Plaines River, the same area where Emily's body had been discovered. Keene got out, walked down to the water's edge, and stood there for nearly 10 minutes, staring into the current. Ramirez wanted to move in, to demand answers, but without cause, without evidence, he couldn't. All he could do was sit there in the darkness, watching the silhouette of a man who might be the city's nightmare. The next morning, Ramirez filed for a warrant to search Keene's vehicle and home. But the request stalled. The district attorney wanted more. A man staring at a river wasn't evidence of murder. Days later, when Ramirez returned to renew surveillance, Keene was gone. He hadn't reported to work, and his sedan had vanished from its usual parking spot. His landlord said he had moved out overnight, leaving nothing but empty drawers and trash bags of shredded paper. It was as if Thomas Keene had melted into the city's shadows. Ramirez slammed his fist against his desk when he heard the news. He was sure they had been close, too close, and now the suspect had slipped through their grasp. In the weeks that followed, reports of another missing woman surfaced. This time, it was Leah Carter, a 25-year-old paralegal who vanished after leaving a downtown bar. Her friends recalled her stepping outside to call a cab. She was never seen again. Surveillance footage near the bar showed a familiar sight: a dark sedan idling on the curb, its headlights dim, waiting. Ramirez stared at the still image of the vehicle on his computer screen. He didn't need the full license plate to know what he was looking at. It was Keene's car. But Keene was gone. And now so was Leah. The third week of the trial brought a new round of tension to Hollow Creek. The defense team, cornered by the mountain of evidence, took a bold step. They summoned their own lineup of witnesses. Old neighbors of the Cunninghams, former classmates of Daniel, and even a distant cousin. The picture they tried to paint was that of a misunderstood man, shaped by childhood neglect and the weight of community suspicion. Daniel, they claimed, had always been the town's scapegoat. A loner, yes, but not a killer. His cousin spoke tearfully about how Daniel once rescued a stray dog and nursed it back to health, a story meant to reveal hidden compassion. Another recalled how Daniel's father was harsh, often leaving him to fend for himself. The defense wove a narrative of a man pushed to the margins, judged unfairly, and now falsely accused because the town needed closure. But the prosecution countered with cold precision. Compassion does not leave fingerprints in blood, the district attorney said, pacing before the jury. This case is not about what Daniel might have been as a boy. It is about what he did as a man. The evidence spoke louder than any character witness. Blood under Daniel's nails matched one of the victims. His alibi shifted with every retelling, and the disturbing journals found in his cabin, filled with dark fantasies of hunting, capturing, and controlling, shredded the defense's narrative. The courtroom became a crucible of silence when the lead investigator held up a small box. Inside lay the locket of Sarah Green, the first girl to vanish from Hollow Creek. It was found in Daniel's personal chest, hidden beneath layers of clothing. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Even the defense attorney lowered his eyes. Still, Daniel himself showed no reaction. Day after day, he sat rigid, eyes darting but lips sealed. When the judge finally asked if he wished to testify, he rose slowly, gripped the rail of the witness box, and stared at the jury. "I did not kill those girls," he said, his voice even, almost rehearsed. "I am not the monster you're looking for. You've all made me into something I'm not." The words hung heavy, but they failed to move the jury. Too much blood, too much evidence, too many ghosts of Hollow Creek lingered in that room. The trial stretched into its 6th week. Families of the victims filled the benches daily, some clutching framed photographs, others holding hands as though bracing against a storm. The weight of grief never left the courtroom, pressing on every word, every glance, every verdict form. As the jury retreated to deliberate, Hollow Creek held its breath. Children were kept indoors, businesses closed early, and the sheriff's office stood watch around the courthouse. The town had waited years for this moment, but fear still gnawed at the edges. Fear that justice might slip away, as it so often had in the past. Hours passed. Then a day. Then 2. On the 3rd evening, the jury announced they had reached a verdict. The gavel struck. The judge asked Daniel to rise. The room stiffened with anticipation. And in that suspended silence, all of Hollow Creek leaned forward, waiting to hear whether justice had finally caught up to the shadows that haunted them. The courtroom was so quiet that the shuffle of the jury foreman's papers echoed like thunder. "On the charge of first-degree murder," the foreman said, his voice firm though his hands trembled, "we find the defendant Daniel Cunningham guilty." A sound rippled through the room. It was not applause, not relief. It was the sound of years of fear exhaling all at once. Some families wept openly. Others sat frozen, as though unsure how to carry the weight of a verdict that had taken so long to arrive. Daniel stood motionless, his eyes narrowed. For the first time in the entire trial, his lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to rattle the families seated closest to him. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "You will be remanded to state custody until sentencing. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck, but the sound did not feel final. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Hollow Creek lived in a strange half-light. On paper, justice had been served. The so-called Hollow Creek killer was convicted on multiple counts of murder, with sentencing scheduled for late summer. The families of the victims were invited to make impact statements, but many struggled to find words that matched their grief. Daniel remained in custody, housed in a maximum security facility hours away. Guards reported that he rarely spoke, but when he did, he whispered about unfinished work. Some dismissed it as attention-seeking, others as the ramblings of a broken man. Still, doubt lingered in Hollow Creek. Sheriff Leland received anonymous letters, written in a jagged scrawl, that claimed the real killer was still free. A deputy found a stray backpack near the river containing a set of rusted knives. And weeks after Daniel's conviction, a girl reported being followed on the road leading out of town. Was it paranoia, or proof that something darker still stalked Hollow Creek? The sentencing came in midsummer. Victims' families filled the courtroom once again, clutching photographs and wearing ribbons in remembrance. When the judge handed down the sentence, life without parole, the room erupted in tears and muffled cries of relief. Daniel only tilted his head, as though he'd expected nothing less. As guards led him away, he looked back once, locking eyes with the sheriff. "You haven't found all of them," he said softly. but loud enough for those nearby to hear. The words gnawed at the town's memory long after the cell door closed behind him. Years later, Hollow Creek tried to rebuild. The trails were reopened, the creek ran clear again, and children slowly returned to playing outside. Yet, for every anniversary of a victim's disappearance, the church bells rang and candles were lit along Main Street. People still whispered about Daniel Cunningham, about whether he truly acted alone. Some swore they had seen someone watching from the tree line late at night. Others believed Daniel's journals hinted at accomplices never found. The Hollow Creek murders had ended in court. But in the minds of the people, in the forests that loomed over the town, and in the shadows that clung to memory, the story never really ended. Because in places like Hollow Creek, darkness has a way of waiting. The Hollow Creek murders may have ended in a courtroom, but the questions remain. Was Daniel Cunningham truly the man behind every disappearance? Or does someone else still walk free, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again? What do you believe? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to True Crime, Dark Files, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chilling case we uncover. Because in the world of true crime, every story leaves behind shadows, and sometimes, the darkest files are the ones still waiting to be opened.